Hey everyone, welcome back to Threaducation. Today we have one of my most highly requested videos, and yes, I am of course talking about the Bloody Osiris story. Now, if you haven't heard of Bloody Osiris before, you've probably still seen examples of his influence on some of your favorite brands, designers, and rappers. And even those of you who have heard of him before may not know that much about his story, because generally speaking, a lot of what he does takes place behind the scenes, and he doesn't do all that many interviews. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how he got his start in fashion, became friends with some of the biggest names in the industry, the launch of his own label, as well as some of the trouble he's faced along the way. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is the Bloody Osiris story. Bloody Osiris grew up in Harlem during the early 2000s, and even from an early age, style was at the forefront of his mind. But that doesn't mean he's always had the same sense of style he has now, or at least he hasn't always shown it. He recalls that when he was first coming up, he dressed like everyone else around him, believing that when you're dressed the same as everyone else, there's nothing to be insecure about. But it's when he realized that he didn't want to be the same as everyone else that he started to experiment with his own personal style. Even though this was the beginning of Osiris's journey into the world of fashion, he was in many ways still just a normal teenager. At the time, he was enrolled in high school, and during an interview with Ill Roots, he says that despite having always been good at school, he started going less and less as his interests fell elsewhere. He did, however, end up going to college after high school, citing his belief that it's still important to get an education. Now keep in mind that all of this was happening around the same time that Instagram was starting to take off. And as we all know, Instagram quickly became the perfect platform for fashionable people to build a following. Osiris created his Instagram account in May of 2012, and while his first few fits weren't as eye-grabbing as they are today, you can definitely tell that he was beginning to explore the boundaries between high fashion and streetwear, like when he wore this Rick Owens jacket over a V-Lone hoodie. Yes, this was very early on, but with fits like these, Osiris was beginning to separate himself from the crowd, and it wasn't long before some bigger names in fashion started to take notice. In 2015, after making a bit of a name for himself in the local streetwear scene, Bloody Osiris got his first big look. Walter Pierce, a popular photographer and casting director, was doing a series for Vice, and he invited Osiris to be featured in the series, which would include this now iconic photo of him and his brother Bloody Dior, who we'll talk about more in just a bit. Not only was this their first time in the spotlight of a major media company like Vice, but Pierce let them style themselves and gave them some creative control over the photo shoot. So in a way, you could also say that this was one of Osiris's first real styling / creative directing opportunities. Now, even as big as this appearance in Vice was for Osiris, perhaps the biggest thing he did in 2015 was launch Jerome Jhamal with his brother. We're gonna come back to this again later in the video because it's been much more popular only in recent years, but for now, just know that Jerome Jhamal is a brand founded and owned by the Bloody brothers, with Osiris having first teased its release in early 2015. So between starting to build a following, appearing in Vice, and launching his own label, things were really starting to come together for Bloody Osiris, but even he couldn't have predicted what was about to happen next. If you watched my video about the Ian Connor story, you'll know that during this time period, Ian was one of the most popular, well-connected people in streetwear. And you'll also know that he was always on the lookout for new talent and had no problem helping to launch the careers of people he saw potential in. And it just so happened that one of those people was Bloody Osiris. It's not exactly clear how they met, but what we do know is that Ian became close friends with Bloody Osiris and Bloody Dior, and then in 2016 he gave them both the opportunity of a lifetime. Ian had a hand in casting the models for Kanye West's Yeezy Season 3 fashion show, which doubled as the release party for his album The Life of Pablo. As I mentioned during the Ian Connor story, he's actually the one who invited Lil Yachty to model for this collection, and he extended the same invitation to Osiris and Dior. It goes without saying that this was a major turning point for the Bloody brothers. Don't get me wrong, they were already fairly popular in the streetwear scene by this time, but being cast as Yeezy season models took them to the next level, and from that point forward there was no looking back. Following his appearance as a Yeezy season model, Osiris had a lot of new eyes on him, and this turned out great because in my opinion, this is when he really started tapping into the style that he's become so well known for. It's almost a bit difficult to describe his style because he's so unique and willing to take risks. But if you ask me, the thing he does best is experiment with proportions. The thing is though, he's not the only guy on Instagram experimenting with proportions. So what exactly makes Osiris so special?
All the swag come from Harlem, especially from the west side. Like, back when they used to do white tee Wednesdays and all that, your white tee had to be fresh or you getting clapped. The competitive nature of everything. That's what keep us going, that's what make us fly.
He doesn't just wear the opposite of whatever's popular, he makes it look good. He deviates from trends, but he also styles himself really well, and that's why he's the type of guy that can pull off just about any outfit. Now all of that being said, it became clear pretty quickly that Osiris had a lot to offer in terms of modeling, styling, and overall creative direction. So that's why, in 2016, Osiris started getting some even bigger opportunities, one of the first of which was modeling for Pastel. Pastel was a label that Kanye West was putting together during the 808s and Heartbreak era, but he eventually abandoned it, and it wasn't heard of again until 2016 when Ian Connor announced that he would be bringing it back. In the summer of 2016, Osiris posted this photo on Instagram wearing the same iconic pastel jacket that Kanye wore at the 2008 American Music Awards. He then posted another photo wearing an all-yellow pastel shirt, and a few months later, the jacket made another appearance during a separate photo shoot. Osiris was just modeling the pieces, but it wouldn't surprise me to learn that he was working on Pastel as a creative consultant or stylist in some capacity. And even if he wasn't, it still says a lot that Ian wanted him to be involved in the brand's revival. Even though Pastel never made the comeback we were hoping for, this was undoubtedly a memorable moment in Osiris's come up. Now everything was looking up for Bloody Osiris, but around this time he did find himself in a bit of trouble. In an interview with Hypebeast, he talks about how he ended up spending some time in jail, but he doesn't exactly specify why, and this is where things get a little complicated. The Bloody brothers have a history of beefing with rapper Uno the Activist, and in 2016 Bloody Dior was arrested following an altercation in Atlanta that resulted in Uno being shot. Uno survived, and Dior accepted a plea deal, but the reason I bring this up at all is because I've seen a few people suggesting that Osiris was somehow involved in this, and that is why he went to jail. We know for a fact that Osiris and Uno did have a personal beef, as evidenced by the time Osiris snatched Uno's chain in New York, but if you go back, you'll see that Osiris actually announced he was going to court in September of 2016, which is an entire month before the shooting even took place. So like I said, it's not exactly clear what happened, the timeline and the details are a little all over the place, but whatever the case is, it's really not anything to get hung up on, because whatever trouble the Bloody brothers were in didn't last long. In just a short time, both of them were free, and it just so happens that Osiris was on the verge of his next big breakthrough in fashion. As we talked about, Ian Connor obviously saw a lot of potential in Osiris, but he wasn't the only one. In 2017, Virgil Abloh flew Osiris out to Florence to model for Off-White's Spring 2018 menswear collection, and then also flew him out to Paris to have him help style Off-White's Spring-Summer 2018 ready-to-wear collection. According to Osiris, this was a great learning experience, and it was also the start of a great partnership between him and Virgil. They've worked together on several occasions since, with the most recent being Osiris's appearance in Virgil's Spring-Summer 2021 menswear campaign for Louis Vuitton. But back to 2017, Osiris now had more of a spotlight on his talent and some experience working in the fashion industry, so it should come as no surprise that his services as a stylist were in high demand. And one of the first people to come knocking was Travis Scott. So a little bit of context here, Osiris is longtime friends with Travis Scott's photographer, Ray's Corrupted Mind. Osiris and Ray met earlier on in the New York streetwear scene, and if you go back on Osiris's Instagram, you can see they actually started shooting together as early as 2015. So Ray was evidently the link between Travis and Osiris, and that is how Osiris started styling Travis Scott. One of the first public gigs he did for Travis was styling him for the cover of the 032C magazine in 2018. This was a pretty major milestone for Osiris because, as he mentioned on Instagram, he used to flip through the same magazine while listening to Travis, and now here he was styling him for the cover. This was just one of several projects that they worked on together, but Osiris has since become a close affiliate of Cactus Jack and continues to work with Travis to this day. So back to Jerome Jhamal. As I mentioned previously, Jerome Jhamal is a brand that was founded by the Bloody brothers in 2015, and according to them, they really envisioned the brand someday being up there with the big name fashion houses. Despite being founded in 2015, it wasn't really all that active until 2018 when Osiris debuted the Jerome Jhamal SpongeBob bandana. So let's pause right here because I know some of you probably love this piece and some of you probably hate this piece. Yes, it is just SpongeBob on a bandana, but let me just say that if Moschino can do it, then so can Jerome Jhamal. And if you ask me, I think that this piece perfectly sums up everything that Bloody Osiris stands for. You wouldn't expect to see a character as bold and brash as SpongeBob on something as gritty as a bandana or a Department of Corrections shirt. Just the same way you wouldn't expect to see someone dressed like this walking the streets of Harlem. Either way, this bandana turned out to be a huge hit and was soon seen on a number of major celebrities including Lil Uzi, Travis Scott, Playboi Carti, Rich the Kid, and Lil Yachty, just to name a few. While we're on the topic, I will quickly mention that in 2020, Osiris did drop a capsule collection titled Bloody's Underworld, which was a separate venture from Jerome Jhamal. But even still, it's good to see him experimenting with different aesthetics as he does with his own personal style. So back to Jerome Jhamal, they went on to release a few other SpongeBob branded pieces, including one with a Disney font, but more recently, it seems like they've been trending towards something a bit higher end. On February 21st of 2021, Jerome Jhamal dropped a collaboration with John Ross's label 7th Heaven. Everything sold out in less than 24 hours, and it makes sense because the pieces were high quality, the color selection was great, and you can really tell that there was a keen attention to detail. If Osiris and Dior do want to continue with their goal of turning Jerome Jhamal into a higher end label, I think that this was a great step in the right direction. And while I did like some of their earlier streetwear pieces, I would definitely like to see this side of the brand more in the future. So here we are in 2021. Bloody Osiris has his own successful label, he's modeled for some of the biggest brands, he's friends with the biggest names in rap and fashion, but even with all that being said, I somehow still think that this is just the beginning for him. Yes, I know he's been popular for years now, but the fact that so many of you asked for a video about his story just goes to show that more and more people are starting to take an interest in him, and he deserves every bit of it. Even just this year, he's been making some pretty major moves. He had the Jerome Jhamal 7th Heaven collab, which we just talked about. He styled Billie Eilish, who is one of the biggest names in music right now. And he even started his own YouTube channel called The Bloody Adventures, which I'll link in the description. He hasn't really been active on YouTube, having only posted one video since January, but I think if he decides to continue with it, it could be extremely successful, because his fans obviously want to know more about him as a person, and he has a level of insight into the fashion industry that very few people do. So finally, and perhaps most importantly, I have to say that his fits just keep getting better and better. He's at a point right now where the objective is no longer putting together the coolest outfit. At this point, he's really just treating it like an art form, and it's an art form where he's continuing to push the boundaries of what he thinks is possible. So that is everything I wanted to touch on for the Bloody Osiris story. He's somebody that I'm obviously a big fan of, and now that you know a little bit more about how he got to where he is today, hopefully you'll see why that's the case. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I've got another highly requested video dropping very soon, so if you want to stay up to date on that, make sure to turn on notifications and follow me on Instagram at Threaducation. Other than that, thank you for watching Threaducation, and I'll see you next time.
Welcome to Bloody's ASMR.